Welcome to Monday Night Bible Study Hub. I'm Ann, and I'll be hosting you tonight in the book of Colossians. This is week number 2 in this wonderful book that is maybe the preeminent the preeminent epistle is the word I'm looking for, about Jesus Christ. The whole thing is about Jesus. And so last week it was so much fun to be talking along and watch the comments start just bursting into spontaneous praise as we just talked about the person of Jesus Christ. And that's exactly how worship should and does often work, which is made me so happy. So we are going to continue in Colossians tonight. I will be putting verses up on the screen, but if you want to have a Bible ready, we're in chapter 1. I hope I can talk tonight. We're in chapter 1, and we will be starting in verse 15. But before we get going, just a quick reminder as kind of where we've come in the last week or so. First of all, hit the like button if you memorized any of the passage from Colossians 1:15 to, what did we say, 23, I think. I've been looking at the verses. I've just been trying to memorize the words. Seriously, even if you did one verse, I want you to hit the like button. And good for you if you did. I am about 85, 90% there, and it's not linear for me. Like I'll get a certain, and then I'll just like drop off. I have no idea what the next few words are, but then I know what the next ones are. But then there's like this cavern, and what on earth is wrong with me? I used to memorize in a line. Now, apparently, I'm just grabbing pieces and parts. So I guess that's what happens when you get to be my age. I don't know. But I'm still working on it. So hopefully, if you didn't get it all memorized, you don't feel bad about that. Just keep, trying again this week. We'll see how far we get. I have a dry throat tonight. Well, let's talk about where we started last week, because we talked about this guy, Epaphras, that we said at the time, who knows who Epaphras is? You never hear about him. He's only listed 3 times in scripture as it is, and barely mentioned at that. And what we just kind of came to the conclusion of was, if it hadn't been for Epaphras, the Colossian church would never have been formed, and the book of Colossians would never have been written. And he's just kind of this behind the scenes. We affectionately referred to him as a nobody for Christ. Affectionately so. And then we just said, hey, let's just all go out there and be nobodies for Christ. And so I hope that you were able to do that this week. And I hope that you embrace that and had a good time, unless you really are somebody, in which case, welcome to Bible Study Hub with all the rest of us nobodies, where we embrace everybody. And then we just talked about 2 heresies that were really attacking the church in Colossae. And we said at the time, these were developing philosophies this early on. About 100, 200 years later, they will get named and be more formulated. But it's the early stages of Gnosticism and the early stages of Asceticism. So Gnosticism would be like some esoteric knowledge, way out there. Not everybody has access to. It's a higher plane, a higher level of thinking. Really feeds the ego, by the way, that type of thinking. We still see this in some forms of like progressive Christianity today, where they're looking for some higher understanding and knowledge and mystical things. Sometimes. And then asceticism, which we said is basically just deprivation. So you just, for the purposes of trying to either scratch and claw your way to God or to achieve some higher spiritual plane, again, you decide to abstain from anything that would bring joy, happiness, taste, sensory enjoyment, all the good things you don't do. And so Paul is really hitting both of these in the book of Colossians, Gnosticism primarily, but we see a little bit of the asceticism too. So we are going to read starting in verse 15, but before we read it, I want to do something to really hammer home. And by the way, I will try to post like the finished slides of this on Facebook so that you're not like madly trying to write them all down in case you want them. But there are 15 things here that Paul gives us. And this is arguably maybe the finest treatise on the person of Jesus Christ in the entire New Testament, only because it's a big, long passage, and it just hits thing after thing after thing after thing that tells us he's not an angel. He's not a created being. He's not just a person like we are. He is God. And this passage tells us in some of the ways that we see that. So I'm just going to give you the list. And again, I'll post this later so you don't have to be scribbling. But we'll start in verse 14. It starts, that's one verse before we're going to start, but I had to put that in there because verse 14 tells us that our salvation is in him, in Jesus. And then verse 15 says he is the exact image of God. Verse 15 also says he is the honored, preeminent son over creation. Verse 16, he created absolutely everything. Verse 16 again, all things were created through him and all things were created for him. Okay, are you starting to see how important creation is in the doctrine of the Bible and in even the personhood of Jesus Christ and who he is? Theistic evolution has no place in a biblical worldview, none. It is clear that Jesus did the creating. Going on, verse 17, he is before all things. He holds the universe together. He is the authority over the church. He is the beginning. Going on, he is the preeminent in the resurrection. In fact, he's preeminent in absolutely everything. All the fullness of God was pleased to dwell in him. We read in verse 20 that he reconciles all things to himself. And then we end up by saying he makes peace by his blood on the cross. That's a lot of stuff. But hopefully, as we just even list it out, you just go, wow, that's my Lord. That's my Savior. That's my Jesus. What are we worried about? He's got it under control. He is fully God. So let's just start with Colossians 1:15 and let's read that. And we're going to break some of these down. Some of them are very easy. We'll scoot through those pretty quickly. But the ones that are a little more foggy for us, we'll spend a little time on. So Colossians 1:15, if you didn't memorize it, says he is, speaking of Jesus, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. So that right there is just loaded. When we think of somebody being the image, Jesus being the image of the invisible God, it's not something that we would think of like there's a statue over there and that statue is the image of this person, or that bronze is the image of this person, because it's not an exact replica. What we're thinking here is mirror. Like you wouldn't look into a mirror, look at your face and say, well, that is weird. That looks just like me. Have your friends get over here. Look at this. That looks like me. They would say, you've lost your mind. That is you. It doesn't look like you. That's you. There you are. That's what we're talking about here. Jesus is God. When you look at Jesus, you see God. Period. Wow, that's amazing. And then it goes on to say, the firstborn of all creation. Now, there are some religious groups, Jehovah's Witnesses would be one in particular, who actually, if they talk to you and they're trying to evangelize you to their persuasion, they will pull that very verse out of context and say, Jesus was a created being. They will proof text that verse. Do you know what proof texting is? It's when you take a little sliver of a passage, a verse, half a verse, whatever, you rip it out of context, metaphorically speaking. You're not ripping it out of the Bible, but you take it out of wherever it appears, and you just use that tiny little couple sentences to prove a point. You can prove literally anything you want to using the Bible if that's how you do it. And anybody could prove anything that any of us said by pulling things that we've said out of the context of the conversation or the speech or whatever, and making it sound like we said something that we didn't. We don't like it when people do that to us. We should never, ever interpret the Bible that way. And if you ever are talking to somebody and say, just for the sake of argument, let's just say it's somebody who pulls that verse out and says, see, firstborn over creation. Jesus was firstborn. He was a created being. The very first thing I would do is say, I would love to read with you, like all the verses before and a whole bunch of the verses after that. Let's get some context here, because that's where you're going to get the meaning. If you read on, and we're about to, there's no way you read that and come to that conclusion when you read the rest of the verses. It completely blows that out of the water. But here's something kind of interesting alongside that. We also, as we interpret the Bible, want to know, how did the original writer intended to be understood? And how did the original readers or listeners understand it in their culture with their language? Whatever that was, that's the meaning of the text. We take that and we apply that to our lives. What we don't do is say, what does that mean to me today in my Western culture and mindset, in my English language? That's the meaning for me. You're going to get it wrong sometimes if you do that because cultures and languages vary. So in Hebrew, firstborn was a little bit different than we would think of it to be in English. How many of you were with us for the book of Daniel? And if you were, do you remember when we got to the part about 7 weeks? And we said at the time, that's not 7 weeks of days. It was speaking of 7 weeks of years. And we said it's kind of like weeks for the Jewish people was kind of like a dozen would be for us. Like I could say, I have a dozen. You would say a dozen what? You wouldn't know. It's not inherently going to be eggs or donuts. It could be 12 of anything. It's just a unit of how many are in something. That's what weeks is. It could be 7 anything. Okay, so we kind of established that back in Daniel. It's the same thing here with firstborn. In our minds, in Western culture, English speakers, firstborn is extremely linear and extremely literal. Your firstborn child is literally whoever came out of mom first. That's it. Could be a girl, could be a boy, could be 20 years in between everybody. It doesn't matter who's smarter. It doesn't matter who's good looking. The firstborn's the firstborn. That's it. That is not how it was for the Jewish people. Now, typically, the firstborn was the one that was first out if it applied to a boy. Girls were never considered firstborn because what this firstborn status carried with it was literally status. It was the authority to take over the family and be the head of the family eventually. The birthright, the blessing, the inheritance, the honor, often double portion at least went to the firstborn. So they were an elevated status in every possible way. But that status could be transferred to somebody else under certain circumstances. In fact, we see this. Let me see if I can find it here in my notes. Here it is. In Psalm 89:20 and then verses 26 and 27, God actually calls David his firstborn. Listen to this. I have found David, my servant, with my holy oil, I have anointed him, and I will make him the firstborn, the highest of the kings of the earth. David was the last born in his family. If you remember the story when Samuel goes to anoint the king of Israel and Jesse brings out all his boys and God says, nope, 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 nope. And he gets to the end and God says, nope. And Samuel says to Jesse, do you have anybody else? I mean, God's rejected every single one of these guys. You got a lot of kids here. And he said no to all of them. And he goes, well, we've got the little runt, basically. He's out watching the sheep. I don't think you want him. That was the one. Yeah, God picked him. Do you remember the story of Jacob and Esau? Esau, they were twins. Esau comes out first. Jacob comes out holding on to Esau's heel. He comes out second. And God says, I choose Jacob. He's my firstborn. So if you understand that there's status, I left this verse up here, the highest of the kings of the earth, that was the status that God conferred onto David as his firstborn, even though David technically wasn't firstborn. So when we speak of Jesus, going back to the passage now, maybe I'll put that back up there, 115. I can find it real quick. Where are you, 115? There it is. Where it says, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Do you understand what that means now? He is highly, highly honored, the preeminent over all creation. Like there is nowhere to go up from there. That's the top. There's nothing else. You're at the top if that is what is said of you. And Jesus is. So we know that that's exactly what God is talking about. Let's go on to verse 16. It says, for by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. Now, if you stop and kind of think about something, in fact, I would love to, I didn't write this question out. This just hit me right now. But if you're typing in the comments, YouTube or Facebook, if you're watching live, when you think about like all creation and Jesus creating everything in all creation, what's a highlight or two that hits your mind? Is there anything that stands out to you in that whole idea of absolutely everything? Well, I can't think of a better word. Everything, all of it, every single thing. If it exists, he made it. If it is, he made it. Is there anything that stands out to you? Go ahead and comment. I want to see if there's anything that hits you particularly. For me, I always think of two things. I think of looking up in the sky when it's really, really dark and you can see so many stars. It literally is like the grains of sand on the seashore. It's just unbelievable. And I look at the galaxy up there and I think, he made all that. That is daunting. That is amazing. And then I think of DNA, like the smallest little particles. And he made that too. And it's like the macro to the micro and everything in between. I just think it's absolutely incredible. Somebody says that they think of the complexity of life and love as we know it. That's beautiful. Somebody says when God sets the stars, and knows each one. Good point. He knows all of them. Wow, that's amazing. Somebody else is saying rainbows. Oh, rainbows. So beautiful. Roberta says he created man in his image and then all the animals as well. Excellent. Mary says she thinks of the heavens too. It looks like I'm not the only one that thinks out there in the universe. Sandy says the ocean. That's a great one. Oh my goodness. The ocean is so incredible and so vast. So as we think of all these things, I mean, your mind just gets flooded, doesn't it? With just incredible amounts of information as to what's possible. Did you notice that Paul picks four things here, that he's going to expound on when it comes to creation? And interestingly enough, none of us, including me, came up with any of these things. Let's go back and let's put this up again. What are the four things that he talks about? Whether thrones, dominions, rulers, or authorities. Okay, that's interesting. Because for me, none of those hit my radar when I'm thinking about creation. So since Paul earlier said that he wants us to be filled with the knowledge of the wisdom and understanding of God, this must be part of being filled with that wisdom and knowledge. So let's figure out what those things are, and then we'll try to figure out why he put those in there. It's very fascinating. So the first one actually is really, really easy. Thrones. Who sits on a throne? A king. Right? Now, we don't have everybody who rules sitting on thrones anymore. At least we hope not. Maybe they think they should be. Anyway, whoever is leading God-created government to keep humanity from absolutely destroying itself. Government's job is to keep us safe, by the way. So that's what they're supposed to be doing. We'll hope that they do that. Anyway, so yeah, he created the office. He's the one we know who puts people into power. So he created the thrones. All right, that's good to know. Dominion's a little bit harder. And I know that some versions have slightly different words for these, but they all mean the same thing. This is the same root word that we get lowercase l, Lord, from. And then I put a couple of verses up there. If you want to read those later, the same exact word is used in all of those. And it seems to refer to angelic beings, but I think it could refer to a human who just simply had lordship over some kind of authority over someone else. So we've got like thrones, that's kings, etc. Easy. We've got dominions. It's either going to be like angels in charge of things or possibly a lower level than kings, but still people in charge. And then we get to rulers and authorities. And actually, this is the easiest one. Normally, things get harder as you go along. This one gets easier because Paul tells us in another book exactly what those are. And it comes from Ephesians 6:12. And you're familiar with this, a lot of you. It says, "For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, people, but against rulers," there it is, "against authorities," there it is, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness. Oh, and he goes on, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. So this rulers and authorities in this context are obviously demons and Satan and that whole realm there. So, oh, and let me just show you. We'll hit this in a couple of weeks when we're in Colossians chapter 2, but he talks about it here too. He says Jesus disarmed the rulers and authorities, there it is again, and put them to open shame by triumphing over them. When he shed his blood on the cross, he triumphed over the demons and Satan. He squashed them. I love that verse. Okay. So now that we know what those things are, the question is, why did Paul choose to highlight those four? Why not the galaxies? Why not the ocean? Why not a rainbow? Why not just the human body and how we are made in the image of God? Of all the four things, why do you think he highlighted those? And I'm serious. I want you to comment. I want to see what you have to say. I had to really, really, really think that through. And I have some ideas, but I would be very interested to hear what your ideas are. I have not been looking at my notes. So while you're writing, I am going to try to get to my notes. There we are, so that I can intelligently discuss this topic. All right. So let's see. Susie is saying, maybe those are the things that could affect us the most. Well, I think that is definitely true, Susie. And I really hadn't even thought about that aspect, but I like where you're going with that. I see, this is why I like to ask you guys questions, because you think of things that I don't think about. That was really, really good. I love it. Terry says, to show that he is supreme over all. Also, excellent. Love that thought. And Terry is staying very much in context, right, with what we've been reading. So we gave you an A+ for good hermeneutics, Terry, to stay in context. It's kind of slow out there. I know it's a kind of a hard question. Does anybody else want to venture a guess as to why, of all the things we could be talking about in creation, those are the four things that Paul decides in this tiny book? It's not very long, just 4 chapters. Everybody's quiet. All right. Well, here's what I kind of came up with. Do you remember last week how we talked about Gnosticism? We just kind of, recapped that at the beginning. And that I'm gonna read Roberta's here. She says, I think because we struggle with these areas, especially to listen to them when we do not want to. Oh, you're talking about to the rulers. No, not to the rulers, like the thrones. Don't listen to the rulers. Sorry about that. Somebody else says, we are controlled by our leaders and also unseen spirits, but God controls all. Oh, really good. Both of you. Excellent input there. All right. So the Gnostics, in addition to their belief that there was this mystical knowledge out there that you had to go get, they also believed in something called dualism. And so you can probably guess that's going to be like either or, right? Two things, because of dual, meaning two. They believe that matter, anything that you can touch, feel, any matter was bad, evil. All matter, evil. All spirit, on the other hand, they believed was good. Now, this just creates all kinds of problems. I mean, massive problems. This probably has something to do with why we go through all this stuff about creation that we were pointing out in our list, because if matter is inherently evil, all of it, then a good God could not create it. So in their minds, instead of saying, whoa, that doesn't work out, let's go back to the scriptures and see if we can figure this out, because that is a dead end. No, they say, oh, well, since that can't be the case, we know probably that good God threw off it. I don't know how to describe it, threw off sparks, like a log in the fireplace will pop and sparks go out, and the sparks, emanations, are other gods. And then those gods spark out and they have emanations and other gods. And eventually down the line of all those small g gods, one of those gods who was really evil created the earth and everything in us and our bodies, and absolutely insane. It's not credible, and it's not scientific, and it's not true, and it's weird, but that's what they believed. To them, it made total sense. So, as we talk about the spirit realm, so we're talking about we've got the matter, thrones, right? And then we've got dominions, which we said could be angels or people. But then we move over into the spirit realm. And the spirit realm here is bad. And God created the humans and the government, which, started out good. He has good plans for. So it kind of starts to crumble their whole philosophy as to all of this. So I think Paul he's got his sledgehammer out, and you're just going to, this is the book of Colossians, Paul with a sledgehammer, just smashing Gnosticism, left and right. Oh, Asceticism, a little bit there. And then we're going to go back and we're going to just keep on smashing Gnosticism, because that was the main thing that was going on here. So I have a feeling that had something to do with it as well. But I loved your comments, and I think you did an absolutely fantastic job. Let's move on to verse 17. And it says, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. This is an easier one. If you are before all things, there is nothing behind you, right? Like you're first. It's just another way of saying there was no one before you. You are the beginning. You are the beginning. And then it goes on to say, and in him all things hold together. In this universe, God is the one who keeps the earth on its axis. He is the one who has it, rotating at a certain speed, who distanced it exactly the distance from the sun so that we would have our lives enriched by the sun and not be killed by it or frozen out from lack of it. He holds everything from the tiniest atom to the whole galaxy together actively. He's not a God who wound it up and then took his hands off and said, well, hope it goes, and then went off and did something else. He is intricately involved. He holds it together. I often hear people talk about, we're going to save the planet. We're going to save the planet. I'm not saying don't take care of the planet. Of course, we should take care of the planet. God gave it to us to take care of. That was Adam's job, take care of it. So that gets passed down to us. We want to be careful and not abuse it and not do stupid things with it. But I'm just going to be blunt with you. You cannot save the planet because you are not holding it together. The only one who could destroy it and rebuild it is Jesus. And that is exactly what he's going to do when he's ready. And you won't be able to save it. When he wants to destroy it, it's done. Let's go on. Colossians 1:18 says, and he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. Oh, there's that firstborn again. That in everything he might be preeminent. All right, when it talks about the head of the body, the church, have you ever thought what happens to churches who decide to cut the head off? Not to be gross. This is, we're talking about, more of a metaphoric application here. But if Jesus isn't the head of your church, then your church has no head. And if your church has no head, your church is dead. I want us to be careful, all of us, because it is so easy to fall so in love with our church that it becomes my church. And then once it becomes my church, then it's our church. And this is how we do it at our church. Don't change our bulletin. That's how we do it at our church. Oh, don't rearrange the seats. No, we've had them here for a long, long time. We like the pews. That's how we do it at our church. And we get to a point, if we're not careful, that we're very inward focused. We're very self-centered. And any change that might open the door for somebody new to come in, maybe somebody who's never been in church, maybe somebody who doesn't know Jesus, that door gets slammed shut because we are more concerned with our comfort than we are with those people. And I'm not getting down on you. I'm preaching to me because I am in that boat too. It's easy to get comfortable and becomes my church. It's not my church. It's not my church. It's Jesus's church, and he's the head. And if I chop off the head, then it's a body with no head, and that kind of body dies. The other way to see a church chop off the head and die is to go into false teaching, preaching heresy, bringing other philosophies in and imposing them on top of Christianity and then calling it Christianity, even though now it's a contaminated mixture of all kinds of different things. It's no longer the gospel. It's no longer Christianity. You have cut the head off the body will die. And you can see that. Probably a lot of us are going, yeah, actually, I'm thinking of a church right now that's going on. And then it says he's the beginning. We just talked about that, just a restatement. And then the firstborn from the dead. So firstborn from the dead would be the preeminent in resurrection. Jesus was not the first to be raised from the dead. He raised Lazarus. And there were others before that, very few, but a few that were raised from the dead. So he wasn't the first one to do it, but he is the preeminent because he was the one who never died again. You realize that? Everyone else who was ever raised, that very small handful, every single one of those people died twice. They got to do it twice. Not Jesus. He conquered it. He conquered death. That's so beautiful. Let's go on. Verse 19 to 20. And it says, for in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile himself to all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. This is so rich. All the fullness of God was pleased to dwell in Jesus. How many ways can Paul come at this? He's the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over creation. Here we have all the fullness dwelling in him. He's the head of the church. He's before all things. It goes on and on. Every single thing Paul is saying and listing out here points to the deity of Jesus Christ. You cannot, that's why I said, if you're hit with, it says firstborn of all creation, that's proof that Jesus was a created being. Say, I'd love to read the rest of the passage with you. Let's do that right now in a kind and loving way to show that's impossible to get that interpretation if you read the rest of it, because the rest of it completely knocks that down. And it goes on too. I love this part. And through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace by the blood of his cross. There is a component of salvation that we rarely think about. When we think of salvation, for those of us who know Christ and we've studied the Bible, we understand the concept of being saved through faith and by God's grace, and that it's not of works, not of anything that we've done. It's a gift of God. We understand that in terms of him taking our sin and giving us his righteousness and making us holy in his eyes so that we can have fellowship with him. And so that when we die, we don't suffer punishment in eternal hell because he took that punishment for us on the cross. That's all true. And that is exactly what we should be thinking. But there's a little bit more that we tend not to think about. And that is this. When man fell in the Garden of Eden, when Satan tempted Adam and Eve and they did bad, he got them. Don't forget that at this point in time, Satan, who is not omniscient, he does not know everything. Smart, yes. Has he seen a lot? Yes. Does he know everything? Absolutely not. At this moment in the Garden of Eden, he has no concept of what is going to happen. None. He doesn't even have anything to go on at this point. He knows what God has said. He knows he doesn't love, trust, you fill in the blank, God. He hates him. But he doesn't know what's going to happen. I think in Satan's mind, he thought that he had utterly, completely, and totally destroyed all of God's creation for all time. I might be wrong, but I have a feeling that was his goal, and he thought he had accomplished it because he had no concept of redemption. God knew all the while what was going to happen, wasn't surprised, wasn't blindsided, and God said, in effect, you played into my hand because I am going to exhibit all kinds of my character traits through redemption that don't get exhibited any other way. How else do I show my justice? How else do I show my mercy? How else do I show my compassion? How else do I show my forgiveness? Satan actually plays into God's hand in showing the glory of God. It's kind of a big concept. I hope I can put this in a way that makes sense and isn't off the path. All that to say, since that moment, the earth has been cursed by God. We have horrible things that happen because it is under the curse, but there will come a time when that too is redeemed, when heaven and earth no longer are impacted by the curse at all forever. God will destroy them, and a new heaven and a new earth is what we will be able to enjoy for eternity. And that happens at the end of the millennial kingdom, when there's one last battle. It's very, very quick, over very fast. Satan is banished forever. Sin is banished forever. We will never deal with it again. That is part of that redemption. And that is what this verse is talking about. I left it up here. To reconcile to himself all things, heaven, earth, all of it. It's not just us. He redeems everything. That should excite you. Sometimes it feels long, doesn't it? Like there's so much suffering, and you just want to say, God, I know you're there, and I know you're holy, and I know you judge sin, but are you going to do that soon? Because it's feeling long right now. Like, can you please do something? He's going to do it. And this is just a little glimpse. We don't even know a whole lot about what that's all going to end up looking like, because the Bible just doesn't give us tons of information. Going to have to wait and see. Well, let's finish this up with a couple more verses here. And you who were once alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he has now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. Wow. If indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and of which I, Paul, became a minister. Let's take a look at 3 words and 3 words. The first 3 words that Paul uses to, let me take that verse that I had off. There it is. Okay. The first 3 words that he uses is that we're alienated, we're hostile, and we're evildoers. I was like, how do you find a picture for that? And I came up with that. That encapsulates who we were before Christ. Those are all really bad words. Alienated. We were completely separated from him. We were hostile to him. And we did evil things all the time. That's a bleak picture. And then Paul goes on to say, you know who you are now because of Christ? Here's your 3 words now. Holy. You are blameless. You are above reproach. The absolute antithesis of what we were. And I chose that landscape because if you go back and you look, okay, you're not growing anything here. There's no fruit. You can plant seeds all over the place. There is going to be no fruit there. But look at this. Apparently this is Chilean blueberries, which just sounds absolutely fantastic to me right now. It's lush. It's bearing fruit. And that is what Paul is talking about at the very, very end. Oh, sorry, that's not the one I wanted. At the very, very end, where he says this verse. If indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard, that's been proclaimed. Here's what he's saying. Real true Christians, those who really know Jesus Christ, who are blameless and holy, they bear fruit. That's what they do. And they persevere. They push on. When hard things come, they're not saved because they do good things. They do good things because they're saved. They're not saved because they keep pressing on and they just don't give up. They keep pressing on and don't give up because they're saved, because the Holy Spirit holds you. When you come to true faith in Christ, one of the fruits, think of the Chilean blueberries, one of the fruits of that new life in Christ is that you keep going in Christ. Not to say you don't sin, not to say that you don't have moments where you're questioning or you have doubts. What I am saying is you will never, ever, if you're truly saved, turn your back on Jesus Christ and metaphorically flip him off and say, I don't want anything to do with you. I'm out. When that happens, that person didn't lose their salvation. They never had it because they didn't persevere. And the Bible is replete with verses that talk about the perseverance of what we call the saints, those who truly know Jesus Christ. So we're going to stop there for now. And we're going to pick up next week and we're going to keep on talking about Jesus. We're going to keep on trying to memorize portions of Colossians. We were trying to get through verses 15 to 23 this past week. If you didn't get there yet, keep working on it. I'm not there yet. I'm going to keep working on it. If you are, memorize more. I hope that was encouraging to you. Every time we talk about Jesus, I just feel like my spirit is lifted. The worries of my heart dissipate. I start to think to myself, what are you so worried about, Anne? He's in control. He's got it. We have nothing to worry about. We can go right to him with our requests. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Well, I'm seeing your thank yous. Thank you so much for participating. Whether you're live or whether you're listening to it later, we're always happy to have you. We do this Monday nights on Bible Study Hub on Facebook. Oh, here it is. If you want to be in our Facebook group, that's our YouTube group. There you go, Ann. That's where you can find them on YouTube, Bible Study Hub. And on Facebook, it says Bible Hub, not a typo. Bible Study Hub was already taken when I went to make the name. So Facebook is just Bible Hub, but we call it Bible Study Hub. All right, I've got to run. So I love you all. I pray for you. I hope you have a wonderful week. Keep Jesus in the forefront. Keep serving him. Let's go out and be nobodies for Christ this week too. And love each other. And yeah, I will see you next Monday night, same time, same place. See you later.